It's a melodramatic title, but the Washington Post recently, y'all, had an article called "The Wives Are Not All Right." And I was kind of like, psh, I'm a husband, so I'm like, the husbands aren't all right. How about that? But then you have to read it and see what it's actually about. Your facial expressions are worth the cost of admission, which, by the way, is free because it's radio. Go on the live feed. You can see Lauren's face. It's one of my best. One of the
live feed
parts.
is down.
Don't do that. Don't go to the live feed.
This is being recorded and will be posted later.
I am like the dog from Up. You can tell me something, and then I just go, squirrel! And I'm distracted.
Yes.
Don't enjoy that so much. But okay, so check out this statistic that should, almost put it to bed, the idea that the wives are not all right. Did you know that 70% of divorces are initiated by wives?
I did not know that.
That's shocking.
It's not just like, because there's essentially 50-50 men and women.
Mm-hmm.
But 70% of divorces are initiated by women.
Yeah, that's come into play since, I think, the 60s.
Yeah, and so I guess one could, there's a number of conclusions you can draw from a number, right? Correlation and causation can't always be the case. Somebody might say, well, women felt empowered in the 60s to get out of abusive marriages. Or perhaps now there's a level of independence that some might view, oh, it's unhealthy. You've probably heard things like that. But what's going on in the article is a little different. It's a bit anecdotal. It's from a columnist called Monica Hesse, and she says this. For a brief period of time this month, I started to wonder whether I was the only female essayist in America who was not either getting or considering a divorce. And then she goes through a list of various essays she'd been reading throughout American culture. She says, Leslie Jamison's new memoir, Splinters, recounts how the unraveling of her relationship coincided with the birth of her daughter. Emily Gould's union didn't end, but came awfully close. In an intimate article for the New York Magazine a few weeks ago, she chronicles a painful and prolonged separation. By the end, she and her husband have moved toward reconciliation, but it's a millimeter by millimeter and day by day. Another new book by Liz Lenz called The American Ex-Wife is partly a memoir and partly an exaltation of divorce itself, which of course I don't support, but nonetheless, it's what it is. Meant to empower certain women to leave the certain kinds of husbands who are disempowering them. In the passage I saw cited most online, and we'll have time, Mike, don't worry. Lenz describes how she spent years thinking she was flighty and forgetful because some of her most beloved possessions, like clothing and coffee mugs, kept going missing. Then one day, prepping for a garage sale in the basement, she found all her treasures in a box.
Ooh.
It turned out her husband hadn't liked them, she writes, and his solution was to hide them from her while making jokes about how she was scatterbrained.
Wow.
Wow.
That actually wasn't the relationship ender, though. The final straw, she writes, occurred when she came home from a work trip to find a bag of garbage on a bench near the back door. This was a recurring fight. Her husband would empty the kitchen trash, but never actually take it outside. It would sit on the indoor bench, reeking, until Lenz caved and finished the job herself. This time the bag had tipped over and the trash was all over the floor. It had been decaying there for who knows how long, and Lenz decided that she could not stay in a marriage where she had to be in charge of the trash, even while traveling on business, where her spouse acted as though a chore was beneath him, but not beneath her. It soon became clear, she writes, about the moment she determined that her relationship was holding her back rather than supporting her. I could be successful, or I could be married, she said. The banal things, what universal ones too, to anyone who's ever had to consider the math of a relationship, what it means to add up chores, hours, patience, unwashed dishes, career achievements, love, and then decide those things into roughly equal parts and divide them up, where each spouse gets and gives the same, right? That's what it's supposed to be like. But all these treaties about divorce she's been reading really are no surprise about marriage. Who benefits from it? Who carries it, she writes. Who gets to be the show pony and who gets to be the workhorse? What should we make of the statistic that 70% of divorces are initiated by wives, while their husbands seem shocked to realize that things actually weren't fine? She cites research and anecdotes pointing to the conundrum of modern marriages. Wives may have entered the workforce, but husbands still haven't entered the kitchen to pick up the slack. Can marriage be saved? She asks. Oh, now again, for those who aren't aware, we're a Christian radio station. The Bible certainly allows for divorce, but under very narrow circumstances. We don't have time to go through all the list right now, but there is a list of circumstances where the Bible allows for divorce. However, the heart of the Lord is for reconciliation and marriage to stay united.
Right.
Even in the midst of those situations where someone commits a sin in a marriage relationship, where divorce is allowed, it's still really ideal to try to find a way to work it out, if it's possible, right? But again, as we mentioned earlier this morning, it's not as if these problems she's describing in this article don't happen in Christian marriages. It's just that a lot of Christians handle them differently. They just resolve to be in a terrible relationship, which I don't know how much better that is. Where you're like, not really divorced, but basically you live together but don't like each other. And it seems to me that the problem they're pointing to is one that I talked recently with a friend who's about 10 years older than me. And he looked at me and goes, Brian, I don't know how anybody can make it on one income anymore, the way the economy is. And what this woman's saying the problem becomes is when in a society now where double income is usually required, men haven't picked up the slack. And it's breaking marriages. That's what she seems to be saying. Some of these guys are jerks, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The guy that hiding her stuff, what a jerk. That's gaslighting. Whoa, that's horrible.
Yeah, that's mental cruelty, and the leaving the trash on the bench is just trashy.
Yeah. So what do we make of this? Daria, do you have any initial responses here?
I think that for some people, the initial reaction will be like, oh, why didn't she say something? I mean, how do we know she didn't?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an element of women do kind of like to play mind games, like, oh, he should just know what I'm thinking. But there's also an element of she probably did say it and say it very plainly, but maybe you weren't listening and maybe you didn't care. So I think there's a little bit of both potentially at play.
Yeah, the article, I didn't have time to read the whole thing, but she does indicate many, many times she told the guy, it drives me crazy that you just take the trash and almost take it out. You leave it on the bench for me. Please just finish the job if you're going to start it. And he wouldn't do it. Either didn't care, didn't pay attention, whatever it was.
And in that case, it's more than just trash. It's, I have no respect for you. This is beneath me, and you are the house servant, and it's your job to take it out. And I'm just going to let it be here reeking. And
yet he never probably consciously thought that. This is how marriages fall apart, right? He probably had something in his mind is, well, she doesn't do X, Y, and Z, and so I'm not going to do this. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because what we want to do is make it easy and say, this guy's probably a chauvinist jerk who just hates women. Well, he probably just is not a great husband and doesn't realize it. We're talking about an article from the Washington Post here called The Wives Are Not All Right. Now, it's not a Christian writer, but it was an interesting article where this essayist, Monica Hesse, talks about how she's just observing a lot of writers, women writers, describing their marriages falling apart for essentially similar reasons. When she gets to the core of it, she's saying 70% of divorces are initiated by wives, and what's really happening here is we've got so many wives entering the workforces, or the workforce, and husbands just are not changing enough for their wives to feel valued. Is that a fair summary, you think, Lauren, of what she's trying to say?
So. Mm-hmm.
So what's your take on what's your initial reaction to this? Are you seeing this in your peers? What do you feel here? I know it's not a problem for Eddie. We've talked about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm seeing it with my peers. Maybe in a couple of years after we've been married, maybe 10, 15 years, it'll start to be a problem. I don't know. I think what sticks out to me is it's not about the trash.
What's it about?
It's about a lack of respect or seeing her. It seems that he doesn't see her and see what she's doing.
And somebody could say, well, Lauren, it's just trash. Who cares? It's one little thing. People do this, right? They're like, well, it's not that big of a deal to me.
But to her it is.
Well, so what? I'm the head of the house. You're laughing but somebody would say that.
Yeah, and
I think she should take it out.
And
I'm the leader of the family.
House should be willing to serve his family and take out the trash.
I agree. Yeah, I don't. Lest anyone think I'm not just
being the head of a
Promoting
family,
discussion.
yeah, being the head of the family doesn't mean you don't take out the trash and you don't, care for your house.
Go ahead, Mike. Hit it.
He's the head. He's not the Lord and King.
Now, what's your thought on this, Mike? As you're hearing this idea, 70% of divorces initiated by women, and this essayist is saying it's a lot of times men not figuring out that when two people are working, you've got to share.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think most divorces take place because one or both of the spouses aren't happy. And that's a really poor excuse for getting a divorce and splitting up your family if you have kids. And even outside of your household family, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, that affects them as well. Mm-hmm. So, and that's, it's not to condemn anyone. It's just that's the way it is. That's what happens.
It often happens that way.
It does that. But, the thing about the trash, that's one thing. But the same guy also was like hiding things he didn't like that his wife liked.
He's a creep.
And telling her, well, you must have lost it. Ha, ha, ha. That's cruelty. The trash thing is just laziness. And that's not a reason to get divorced. But it's also not a reason to say, hey, our marriage is fine. Mm-hmm. I have took out the garbage. That attitude just shows you don't really care about your spouse. He doesn't care about his wife. When you care about somebody, when you love them, you want to help them out every once in a while.
Yeah, and if I'm going to be brutally honest about this in my own life, I would say that I know Sarah and I have been in phases where we're not overt about it. You wouldn't know it, but we're kind of keeping score.
Mm. Yeah,
like
that's natural.
I'm in my head kind of going, wow, I did this, this, and this, and she did that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, meanwhile, I'm missing 16 things she did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's how these situations creep in. It's not usually, and this is why I don't like this example, because he's a gaslighting abuser, okay, mm-hmm. that didn't take out the trash. But I think there's a lot of marriages where you start keeping score. And it's little things. And it's the little things that ruin it.
Yeah. And I think everybody keeps score, but then if you're wise, you realize that's really stupid.
It is really stupid. And yet sometimes you're so stubborn like me. Like I've talked about this before, but it was really hard in our marriage when Sarah went back to work. We didn't expect it would be. We didn't have a choice. Mm-hmm. One of my kids had a medical problem and one income wasn't going to work anymore. This was like a long time ago, 8-10 years ago. But if I'm really being serious, Sarah going back to work was hard on me. It's dumb stuff like, we did talk through it, but somehow I still expected that since she made dinner before. And so I just kind of assumed she'd keep doing that. What an idiot. It makes no sense. I was home starting at like noon or 2.
Yeah.
Why would she? And then, I can start cooking. But then, she was still doing the grocery shopping and meal planning. What sense does that make? What, is she my servant to plan what I'm going to cook? You see, it took me so long to get out of the mindset of how our family system was set up when she went back to work. It wasn't malicious. I wasn't being a jerk. I was being a jerk, but I didn't know it.
It wasn't intentional.
No, it was not intentional. Mm-hmm. And I'm stubborn in it. And I'm like a little slow to pick up on some emotional hints. And so it was really hard for us to make this transition. And it seems to be kind of that's what she's describing, is marriages will fall apart because a guy can't somehow shift how the family works. You can't have one income and shift to 2 and think everything's going to be the same.
But then men will do the same thing. I mean, the article was about the wives are not all right, but sometimes the husbands aren't all right. And
that's true.
Like you said, the wife going back to work, that's going to change the dynamic. And if you were raised and you were stuck on, well, that's woman's work and this is man's work, that's not going to work for you. Because you're going to have to make changes. Maybe your wife is going to have to cut the grass and you're going to have to wash the dishes because that's the way the schedule works, mm-hmm. that you're going to be able to help the kids do whatever they need to do.
Yeah,
and
there's no man's work and woman's
together
work.
Once in a while. Yeah.
There's chores. That's what there are. And you divide them up.
Right. Well, it's not like rules set in stone, but there are some things.
There's stereotypes out there, but... Yeah. Like Eddie prefers doing laundry. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like how you do it.
Yeah.
What, does that make him a woman? No. I mean, yeah, it's a whole other thing. So,
Yeah. I mean, like if we flip it on its head, Eddie's out of town. He normally does trash. So am I just not going to do trash while he's gone?
Yeah.
Am I just not going to take the trash cans to the curb because he's gone?
that'd be annoying.
That's silly.
Mhm.
That's silly.
Your
But-
equal partners equally contributing to the upkeep of the house that you both reside in.
Yeah.
But now, okay, let's be fair here because, you know, I get frustrated by piling on men all the time. I don't want to do that. And yet 70% of divorces are initiated by women. So, like, there's something to say here that she's not totally wrong that the wives are not all right. However, what in these scenarios we're talking about, Daria, you hinted at it, but how can a woman share some responsibility in the health of a relationship?
She needs to communicate.
Mhm.
A lot of women, we don't mean to do this, but I think we play mind games and we just assume he should just know to do this. Well, he probably doesn't. Just like you can't read his mind, he can't read yours.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think sometimes, and help me here, I think sometimes wives might underestimate the level of specificity they have to get to. Like if Sarah doesn't look at me and go, Brian, it hurts my feelings when you fill in the blank, I'm not going to get a hint. It's going to have to be that clear. Or when you put the trash on the back bench and you don't finish doing it, that makes me feel not valued.
Mhm.
Like if it's not that specific, I may not get it. But when I hear that, game over. I got to change it right now. And I'll want to.
Mhm.
If it's healthy, he'll go like, oh my gosh, I want you to feel valued. I'm on it. But
And-
going like, oh, you left the trash there again, huh?
Yeah. How helpful is that?
My response is, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Aren't you
Anyway,
proud of me for taking it out of the can?
exactly. Like there's part of me where I totally missed what you meant by that. And
Yeah.
you felt like you said it completely.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair gender stereotype though? I don't know. I don't want to go too far on that. I think it's pretty fair.
I think
Insinuating?
men and women do that sort of thing.
We both do. Is there anything else, Lauren? Women can do better?
I mean, we've
I
talked
just don't
about.
want to dump on men on this the whole time.
Yeah. We've talked about. What did I say? I was freezing Eddie out one time. We were in an argument.
You give them the silent treatment?
Yeah, silent treatment. And then Ron was like, "Oh yeah, Dan has done that, and I didn't even know." You know, 'cause he was like, "Oh, Dan is pretty quiet today." But like a wife or a girlfriend is in her own mind thinking, "Oh, I'm really sticking it to him, being given the silent treatment," and that's not useful for you or for anybody.
Yeah,
It's
'cause
it's not helpful for your husband or your boyfriend.
he's enjoying the silence. Didn't realize.
Exactly.
He's like, wow, it's really quiet around here. It's nice.
Yeah. And you're only making up stories in your own mind of what's actually happening because you're not talking about it.
Yeah, and I don't know. This is the oddest thing, right? But I think that Christian couples and many couples in general, but Christian couples, don't talk about things. Like
Yeah.
we carry hurts and we don't bring them up.
Mm-hmm.
We either don't have the skill set to do it, or
Mhm.
we don't know how, or whatever it is. We got to talk clearly about these things, because I think marriages fall apart not it's just because people have these things happen.
I think, like you said, your example, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, Eddie was saying something. I didn't really even know what he was saying. I wasn't really understanding. And I said, I don't really know what you're saying, but it sounds kind of mean.
I like that,
Yeah.
actually.
I was like, it sounds kind of mean and it's hurting my feelings, even though I don't really know what you're saying. And he's like, oh, that's not how I meant it. That's not what I meant to say. I'm sorry. I came across that way. That's not what I intended. We just got to say it.
And it sounds so simple,
That it's hard.
very hard. Many
Mhm.
couples struggle to do. It took Sarah and I to have marriage counseling to get
Yeah.
really good at it, or at least start getting good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So statistics indicate the wives are not all right, especially if you're in a family, I think, where you're moving from a single to a dual income household. And if you're a traditional family like mine was, guys, snap out of it. Like you've got to hit pause, have a third party come help you figure out to make sure that your wife is not continuing to do more than you. It's not okay. I'm telling you because I failed at this. Thankfully, my wife is understanding and patient. All right, we got to go. It's 9:00. J.D. Greer has to preach. There's so much more to say. Maybe Friday we'll talk about this. Who knows? It's follow-up Friday coming up then. And don't forget, Thursday, 8 a.m., Ron's going to get his head totally shaved and my face. I'm not going to have a beard anymore. We don't know what's happening under there. We're going to find out. It might be disappointing, just to prepare yourself. Don't get excited because it could be like, oh no, grow that back. And I'm okay with that because I'm gonna.